info. She is talking about ghosts hanging around what some say is a real-life haunted house in Metro Detroit.
Haunted houses pop up all over the place this time of year.
A new Wall Street Journal report profiles the many parents who think they can see ghosts, specters, and mysterious movements on their advanced baby monitors. I freaked out. I stopped what I was doing and I ran upstairs and I grabbed my daughter.
Heather says this so-called ghost scratched her daughter Lily and attacked her too.
You are tuned in to the Ghost Signal. Hello and good morning or evening wherever you are across the 24 time zones, and welcome to the Ghost Signal. If this is your first time finding the signal, happy to have you along, but if you are returning, welcome back. This is episode 22, the special Halloween episode, where we will take a little peek behind the curtain of time to see how the spooky holiday got started and how it got to be the celebration that it has become. Then a gleefully ghoulish creepypasta that teaches us to follow our instincts when trick-or-treating, dear listeners. And as always, if you have a creepypasta of your own or a true ghost story, send it to the Ghost Signal Podcast at gmail.com. And if you include a mailing address, I will send you a 3x3 sticker of the Ghost Signal logo and maybe some other stuff too. It's gonna be rad. Anyway, on to content. Ever wonder why a holiday like Halloween even exists? Who the hell thought up trick-or-treating in the first place? And has anybody in our lifetime ever actually bobbed for apples? All these questions and more will be answered momentarily, dear listeners. So get your pumpkin spice latte, light your pumpkin spice candles, and get a nice big handful of those peanut butter cups, because we're going back in time, dear listeners. The truth will be exhumed. Prepare for dead air.
dead air.
Where does Halloween come from? Why do we wear masks and costumes? And what's the deal with jack-o'-lanterns? We have to go way back to the ancient Celts who lived thousands of years ago in Western and Central Europe, about to the year 1000 BC to find out. These ancient peoples separated the year into two halves, the light half and the dark half. The first night of the dark half was called Samhain, but spelled like Samhain. Bonfires brought in their new year and was the final celebration of their harvest. He also held the belief that the veil between the worlds of the living and the dead was at its thinnest on this night, which on the Roman calendar was October 31st. They believed that spirits of the ancestors could cross over into our world, and if you weren't careful, you could wander into theirs. The living mingling with the dead is at the heart of all Halloween traditions. It continued this way for hundreds of years, the tradition being passed down generation to generation until a new phenomena began sweeping through Europe. It absorbed and transformed local traditions as it spread, inventing its own holidays to mirror and overlap what was already in place. It was called Christianity, and it is the single largest factor in how Samhain turned into Halloween. Another pagan holiday called Lemuria, celebrated on May 13th, was their day to placate the dead by pouring milk or putting little cakes on their graves. This spooky tradition found itself square in the eye of the Christian Church. The Church co-opted Lemuria in 609 AD, turning May 13th into All Saints' Day. Even though the pagan festival found itself Christianized, its practice remained virtually unchanged. And it was very successful. So successful, in fact, that the church leaders decided to change the day of All Saints' Day to a different day, one meant to drain the life out of Samhain, November 1st. And to some extent this worked too. As people began accepting church doctrine, the name Samhain was replaced by the name All Hallows Evening, then All Hallows Even, and eventually becoming the name we all know today, Halloween. Then, going one step further, the Catholic Church adds yet another day on November 2nd called All Souls' Day, which they intended to be a day of reverence not just for the saints, but for all loved ones who have gone before. This is where Halloween gets its association with death and decay and the supernatural yet again. In the Middle Ages, priests began using All Souls' Day to ask parishioners to pray for all the souls caught in purgatory, which was best described as hell light. According to church tradition at the time, if enough prayers were offered for a particular soul, purgatory would release them into heaven. This belief led to a new tradition in which children would go souling from door to door, begging for little spiced cakes baked with raisins in exchange for prayers for the dead, and the first version of trick-or-treating was created. All the pieces were in place now. In 17th century Western Europe, the prototype for Halloween was in place, but had yet to find its way to the New World. The witch hunts were in full effect, and naturally witchcraft began to be associated with Halloween, as were ghosts and the vampires of Eastern European tradition. October 31st seemed to be a dumping ground for everyone's spooky traditions, but the Puritan American colonies wanted nothing to do with it. Meanwhile in Britain, a new tradition had sprung up. People would imbibe maybe a little too much booze on All Hallows Eve, put on masks and costumes, and go door to door performing little plays in exchange for food or money. But if they were refused, things could get a little rowdy. This weird little tradition faded into the background about as quickly as it rose, but came back with a vengeance on November 5th, 1605. Guy Fawkes, a member of a provincial group of Catholics, conspired to kill King James VI by blowing up the British House of Lords with 6 kegs of gunpowder. It failed, however, and he was caught, tried, and executed on January 31st, 1606. His body being drawn and quartered with the pieces being thrown into a large bonfire. Ever since, the 5th of November has been known as Guy Fawkes Day, or Bonfire Night, with children putting on masks and costumes and causing chaos in the streets, parading, begging, and building bonfires. Since this day had so much Halloween energy and was so close to it on the calendar, Guy Fawkes Day got pretty much absorbed by Halloween. And still no sign of the holiday in the Puritan colonies. They viewed the supernatural as something to fight against, something that was to blame for all their troubles. But as more and more English families began seeking their fortunes in the New World, they were bringing their odd traditions with them and started new colonies independent of the stodgy Puritans. Halloween had come to the New World. It had lost much of its veracity by the mid-19th century, however. It had turned from a rocket celebration into a low-key gathering of family and neighbors around a small fire telling ghost stories, while the kids continued to practice the tradition of souling in masks and costumes. And if it just stayed this way, I would have been just fine with it. But it was not to be. In 1861, the United States became involved in its own Civil War. Over 500,000 American soldiers died in this horribly bloody 4-year war, with entire families being wiped out. Back in 1861, there was no internet or cell phone coverage, so when a soldier died, there was a strong possibility that news of their death would not reach home, leaving thousands of people to wonder what had become of their sons, husbands, and fathers. This single-handedly created not only the Thanksgiving Day holiday, but the spiritualist movement as well. Since tradition long held that the veil between the worlds was thinnest on the night of October 31st, many people used that night to use the more occult tools of tarot cards and early Ouija boards and other divinations to try and contact those who never came home, searching for some form of closure. It was around this time that a lesser-known backwoods Irish tradition started gaining traction in America. Irish legend held that a man named Jack was such a bad prankster and troublemaker that he wasn't allowed into heaven after he died, and was in fact such an asshole that Satan kicked him out of hell. Impressed that this was even possible, upon his expulsion on one Halloween night, Satan gifted Jack a single ember of hellfire, so at least he'd have a way to light his endless trek through eternity. Jack needed a way to carry this ember, so he plucked a turnip out of the ground, hollowed it out, placed this ember inside, and became Jack of the Lantern, or Jack-o'-lantern. But once in the New World, turnips seemed to be lacking in quantity, so the Irish immigrants found something else much more abundant to put candles in and carve faces into: pumpkins. And so the tradition continues. By the early 20th century, immigrants from all over the world were coming to America in numbers never before seen. Even though Halloween had been more subdued in the U.S. in the years before the Civil War, in Europe it remained a day of rambunctious celebration. In cities like New York, Boston, and Chicago, Halloween was just getting out of hand. Absent were any traditions of honoring the dead, being replaced with the night known as Devil's Night, where it was all tricks and no treats. Arson, derailing streetcars, vandalism, malicious pranks ending in injury, and on occasion even death, threatened to get Halloween canceled permanently. The Great Depression is thought to be mostly to blame for this, with frustration at all resources being at a premium. All that negative energy had to go somewhere, and Halloween was it. It had gotten so bad in 1933 the day was labeled Black Halloween, as millions of dollars of damage had been caused across the country. If this holiday was to survive, it needed to change immediately. Halloween needed to be tamed. And who would swoop in from on high to save Halloween from the clutches of actual evil? Corporate America with huge dollar signs in its eyes, that's who. First came something called Denison's Bogey Books, which were little books full of suggestions a little more kid-centric and family-friendly. Prank night to party night was their goal. Once their bogey books became popular, they expanded to masks and paper costumes, marking the first time in history anything was mass-produced for the specific intent to be used to celebrate Halloween. And it worked very well. But as you might expect, dear listener, costumes made of paper didn't really mix well on a night with bonfires and candles and pumpkins, and a lot of kids got hurt as a result. So companies like Denison's were forced to start making their costumes out of something relatively new: plastic. Somewhat durable, cheap, and most importantly non-flammable, these things flew off the shelves. Soon the streets were flooded on Halloween night with little Indians and cowboys, vampires and ghosts, witches and grim reapers, and hobos and pirates. Halloween parades started popping up, first in Allentown, Pennsylvania, then New Jersey, and then everywhere else, even in Anoka, Minnesota, which dubs itself the Halloween capital of the world. Doris Hudson Moss once published an article in American Home magazine suggesting how to buy off would-be pranksters with treats like warm donuts, popcorn balls, and candy apples, and may have actually coined the term trick-or-treat. With this brilliant new tradition came the candy companies. Mars bars, peanut butter cups, and Hershey's chocolate became Halloween staples. Candy had finally tamed Halloween. The holiday started showing up in pop culture. Disney cartoons, comics like Charlie Brown, and novelty songs celebrating the holiday began appearing around the 1940s. It had officially become a 100% kid-centered holiday. That is, until 1978. Director John Carpenter took a stab at creating the first adult-oriented movie centered around the holiday, in which a William Shatner masked killer stalks around murdering anyone he could get his hands on, simply titled Halloween. It was an incredible success that spawned many sequels and variations, and showed that the holiday wasn't really just meant for kids anymore. Adult-themed costume parties started becoming popular in the 1980s, with the costumes tending to be more seductive than scary. Any excuse we can get to party and drink copious amounts of alcohol, really. Or if you want something a little more scary than handing out candy to trick-or-treaters or getting drunk, there's a billion-dollar-a-year haunted attraction industry just for you. For me personally, this is by far my favorite holiday. The deep traditions, the ritualism, and more than that, the spookiness of it. My perfect Halloween is me and some close friends, sitting in an actual haunted house, lit only by candlelight, telling ghost stories to each other with an EVP recorder on one side of me, and maybe a small glass of milk on the other. Oh yeah, the bobbing for apples thing. This dates back to the Celts and their Samhain festival. Young, unmarried people would try to bite an apple out of a basin or tub filled with water while blindfolded. The first to accomplish this task would be the next in line to get married, and if a young maiden put her apple under her pillow that night, she would dream of her future love. It was a fun little fertility tradition that fell off with the commercialization of Halloween. There, that's a thing you know now. Happy Halloween, dear listeners. You are all now officially Halloween experts. Now, for my offering this holiday, I present for your approval a trick-or-treating story that Doris Hudson Moss never would have imagined in her worst nightmares. It was written by Redditor Colorblindness, and it is called Nana Nettles. There's a light in the attic. Nana Nettles was a mean old woman that lived at the end of the street and loved to scare kids on Halloween. Mom always warned us never to go to her house when we trick-or-treat, and for a good solid 12 years I did that. I would sometimes hear about kids that did go, and usually they would claim they weren't even scared. She's really nice. In fact, I would say she gives out the best candy, they would say. I figured now that I was a teenager it would be a lot safer. After all, she's probably in her mid-90s and I'm 5'5". What could she do to me? So when my mom told me that I had to take my little brother trick-or-treating, I decided to make Nana Nettles our first stop. The house was big. It's always seemed like there was no way that she could live alone, but it was so empty. Trash in the yard, everything overgrown and gray. If she wanted to pass the place off as being haunted, it wouldn't be too hard to convince anyone. I thought we weren't supposed to go here, my little brother Joey said as he tried to pull away. That's just a story. My friend Briley says that she has the best candy on the block. So come on, scaredy cat, I told him as I got him up to the front door and knocked loudly. There was no answer. I peeked inside the room and tried to get a good look, but I couldn't see anyone. The door creaked open just a smidge. "Come in, dearies. I have enough candy for the both of you," a voice said. "Hello?" I said as I pushed the door open. There was no one there. The house looked like it hadn't been lived in for quite some time, but then as the door opened wider, I could smell the stench of death, and I saw Nana Nettles in the recliner, or at least what was left of her. Skin rotting away, muscle turned to sludge, her bones black and moldy, a hollow shell of the woman that once lived here. I screamed and ran all the way home, not even bothering to look back. And like an idiot, I didn't even check to be sure Joey was following me. I trekked back to the house, certain whatever evil lived there had swallowed him up. "Joey, are you in there?" I shouted. Silence answered. Then I heard this satisfied burp. I looked inside and saw a silhouette hovering over Nettles' corpse. It was Joey. He had torn back the scalp from the corpse's skull and was dipping his fingers into her goopy brain, licking them off as he chowed down on what was left of Nana Nettles. When he saw me, his eyes sparkled with playful glee. "You are right. This really is the best candy," he slurped. Then he smiled hungrily. "I think I need more." And that's it for my Halloween special, dear listeners, spooks and specters. A little ghost signal Halloween treat. A quick little shout out to the person who made me fall in love with Halloween when I was a little boy, with many of my favorite memories revolving around this holiday. Thanks, Mom, and I apologize for getting Grim Reaper makeup on your good towels when I was in junior high. Visit the website, theghostsignalpodcast.com, to drop me a line, get into the Discord server, or check out the Ghost Signal Patreon. The Ghost Signal is executively produced by Jason Wilson, Patreon by Brooks Bigley, creative direction by Cassie, custom sound beds by J.M. Scherf, and video editing by Hale. And I'm your ghost host with the most, Control Operator Jeff. This episode also marks the end of Season 1. I hope you enjoyed the 22 episodes of the first season as much as I did creating them. If there is to be a second season, it will begin on January 7th, the first Saturday of 2023. So until then, dear listeners, spooks and specters, ending transmission. Reach me at theghostsignalpodcast@gmail.com.
This has been a Grey Rooms production. Copyright 2021 and 2022.
The ghost signal is lost. Transmission terminated.